Welcome back to History to Sleep To. So tonight, we're going to spend some time with a man called Edmund Hillary. It's a slow one, about 2 hours, and it's meant to help you drift off, not to keep you awake. There won't be any sudden loud bits, no jolts, nothing to startle you. The pace just stays slow the whole way through. You don't need to follow every detail. Honestly, you don't need to follow much of it at all. Just let it sit in the background, let it carry you. So, get comfortable. Turn the lights down if they're still on. Close your eyes whenever you'd like. You can listen at low volume. The level stays even all the way to the end. Most people know Hillary as the first man to the top of Everest, and he was. But we're not starting up there. We're starting back home, in a quiet paddock with the hives. All right, let your breathing slow, and we'll begin. A clover paddock at the edge of a small town called Tuakau on a hot afternoon in February 1939. Tuakau is the Maori name. It sits about 30 miles south of Auckland, in the north of the North Island of New Zealand, on a low ridge above the river Waikato. Waikato, where the river bends south through dairy country before it turns west towards the sea. It's a small town, a church, a railway station, a general store, a few hundred houses among the paddocks, a wide, flat sky. The paddock is about 3 acres of clover in flower, white and pale pink, and the air above it is moving slightly with the heat off the grass. 2 men work at the edge of the field, 20 feet apart, bent over wooden boxes stacked 4 high. The boxes are beehives. The men pull the spring honey supers off the top of each one. A super is the box of frames on top of a beehive. The bees fill it with honey through the spring. By February, in this part of New Zealand, the boxes are full and heavy, 60, 70 pounds each, and the beekeepers come round and lift them off, one by one, and stack them on a flatbed truck parked at the gate. The 2 men are brothers. One is 25 years old. His name is Rex. The other is 19. His name is Edmund Percival Hillary. He is 6 feet 2, lanky, long arms, a wide-brimmed hat with a square of fine white netting hanging from the brim and tucked into the collar of his shirt. Long sleeves rolled past the elbow, heavy gloves on the truck beside him. On the ground beside him, a tin smoker, a small can with a bellows on one side and a spout on the other, is putting up a thin column of grey smoke from a smouldering pad of sacking and pine needles. He pumps it twice. The smoke gets thicker. He directs it at the entrance of the hive. The bees are calm in the afternoon heat. They cluster on the front of the hive in a thick brown beard. He lifts the lid. He brushes the bees back with a soft brush. He pulls out a frame. The frame is heavy. He hefts it in one hand to feel the weight. He nods to himself. He sets it on the truck. He moves to the next hive. He has been doing this since 7 o'clock this morning. He will do it until 6 in the evening. He will do it again tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. There are 2,000 hives scattered across this part of the country. The Waikato and the King Country, an hour or two south. The brothers move them on the back of the truck in the spring, set them in good clover paddocks for the summer, take the honey off in February, move them again before winter. The bees and the brothers and the truck, year after year. He's a beekeeper from a small town south of Auckland. In 14 years and 3 months from this hot February afternoon, almost to the day, he will be the first person to set foot on the highest place on earth. His name, again, is Edmund Hillary. We're going to spend a little over 2 hours with him. Settle in. To understand how the young man in the paddock got to the top of Everest, and how, 54 years later, his ashes get carried back into the Khumbu by a Sherpa funeral procession and buried at a monastery on a hill. We have to go back almost 20 years to a small wooden house at the other end of the same town. It's the 20th of July, 1919. He is born, not, in the end, in Tuakau, but in Auckland, in a small lying-in hospital on the southern slope of the harbour on a winter morning. The southern winter. New Zealand's seasons are upside down for British listeners. July is midwinter here. His parents are Percy and Gertrude Hillary. They have one older child, a daughter called June, born 2 years before. There will be one more child, a son called Rex, the brother working the next hive in the paddock, born in 1920. Percy Hillary is a journalist. He edits the Tuakau District News, a small weekly paper covering the town and the dairy farms around it. He's a returned soldier. He was at Gallipoli, Gallipoli, the Turkish peninsula, with the New Zealand and Australian forces in 1915, came home invalided after a sniper wound to the head and recovered slowly through the rest of the war. Gertrude is a former schoolteacher from Mangawai, north of Auckland. She is steady, warm, religious in a quiet way, and far less anxious about money than her husband. In 1920, when Edmund is 2 months old, Percy applies for a soldier settlement loan and buys a small block of land, about 100 acres, mostly clover, with a few stands of native bush, at the edge of Tuakau. He moves the family into a wooden farmhouse on the property. He takes up beekeeping with his brother George as a way to supplement the journalist's salary. The brother George knows bees. Percy learns. The hives go in at the edge of the clover paddock, the same paddock where, 19 years later, the 2 Hillary brothers will be lifting frames in the heat. The clover comes back every spring. The bees do well. The young Edmund grows up among them. If you're starting to drift, that's all right. The room you're in is still here, and so is the sound of this. You don't have to follow every detail. The story stays with you. The Hillary house at Tuakau is small. Wooden weatherboards, a tin roof, a veranda on 3 sides. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen at the back with a coal range, a living room at the front with a Bible on the mantel, and a framed photograph of Percy in his army uniform above the fireplace. A long drop privy at the bottom of the garden. No electricity until the late 1920s. No telephone until later than that. Edmund is a quiet child. Small for his age. He doesn't shoot up until he's 14 or 15. Shy at school. Bookish. The family is religious. Percy has read a popular self-improvement movement of the time called Radiant Living, which is half theosophy and half practical advice on diet and posture. And the children grow up on porridge and brown bread and a lot of fresh vegetables. Percy is a strict father, distant, sometimes irritable, intermittently kind. The children are expected to work, feeding the chickens before school, lifting the hives in summer, splitting firewood on Saturdays. And they do. There isn't much affection in the household. There is, instead, a sense of duty. Gertrude is the warmth. She reads to the children at night. She walks them down to the river to swim in summer. She defends Edmund when his father is harsh. At 5, Edmund starts at Tuakau Primary School. He walks the 2 miles each way, mostly along the road, sometimes through the paddocks if it isn't raining. He is the smallest in his class and stays the smallest for a long time. He's not, by his own account later, particularly happy at school. He's bullied a little for being small, for being bookish, for being the editor's son. He learns to keep to himself. He reads adventure novels mostly. Edgar Rice Burroughs, the Tarzan books. John Buchan, books about explorers. Books about ships. Books about places very far from a clover paddock south of Auckland. By the time he's 11, the family has saved enough to send him to Auckland Grammar School in the city. It's a long way. He commutes by train, an hour each way, every weekday, from the Tuakau station to the Auckland terminus, with a long walk at the end. He carries his books in a leather satchel. He carries a packed lunch. He spends the train hours reading. At Auckland Grammar, he does well academically, but is socially invisible. He's still small. He doesn't make the rugby team. He doesn't make the cricket team. He's tutored in Latin and mathematics and French. He gets steady marks. He gets no prizes. And then, in the winter of 1935, the southern winter, July, August, when he is 16, the school organizes a trip up to Mount Ruapehu, Ruapehu, an active volcano in the middle of the North Island that carries a permanent ski field on its upper slopes. It's a long trip, 2 days on the train down through the Central Plateau, a steam train pulling up a long gradient through native forest, a stop at the National Park station, then a bus up a rough metal road to the chateau on the lower slopes of the mountain. It is the first time he sees real snow. He writes about it later, about getting off the bus and seeing the white peak above the cloud line, the smell of the cold, the way the snow squeaks under his boots when he steps off the road for the first time. He writes that he is 16 years old and has never been so happy. He spends 10 days on the mountain. He learns to ski, badly. He climbs, with a school party, to the crater rim, in heavy boots and a borrowed wool coat, and stands at the lip of the steam vent and looks down. On the train ride home, he tells his school friend Ron, sitting opposite, eating a sandwich, that he doesn't want to go back to school, that he wants to be a climber. Ron, eating his sandwich, says, "All right." He goes back to school. He finishes the year. He passes his university entrance examinations. In 1937, at 18, he enrolls at Auckland University College, what's now the University of Auckland, to read mathematics and science. He doesn't enjoy it. He attends some lectures. He cuts most of them. He spends a lot of time in the library reading mountaineering books, particularly the accounts of the British expeditions to Everest in the 1920s. Mallory, Irvine, the disappearance high on the northeast ridge in 1924. Mallory and Irvine were last seen, alive, about 800 feet below the summit of Everest, on the 8th of June 1924, walking strongly up the north ridge into a cloud bank. Whether they reached the top before they died is a question that has never been settled. He drops out of university after 2 years. He goes home to Tuakau. He joins his father and brother in the beekeeping business full-time. It is 1939. He is 20 years old. The beekeeping years are the years that shape his body and his patience. Commercial beekeeping in 1940s New Zealand is hard physical work. The hives weigh about 120 pounds each when full. The brothers lift them by hand off the trailers and onto wooden pallets in the paddock, set them up 4 hives to a stand, level them with shims of wood, light the smoker, put on the netting hoods and check each one for the queen, for the brood, for signs of disease. They winter the hives down in the Waikato, where the climate is mild and the bees can survive the cold months on stored honey. In spring, they move them up to the King country, higher, cooler, with later flowering clover, and let them work. The new season. In late summer, they take the honey off. In autumn, they treat for disease, replace old queens, repair the boxes that need repairing. In winter, they extract the honey, drum it for sale, repair the rest of the boxes. There is no off-season. The brothers work 12-hour days through summer. They drink water by the gallon. They eat sandwiches in the cab of the truck. They sleep in the truck sometimes, parked at the edge of a paddock when the day's run is too long to drive home. Edmund Hillary later writes that the beekeeping years were the best physical preparation he could possibly have had for what was coming. Lifting heavy boxes off trailers, hour after hour, day after day, in the heat, in the cold, in the rain. Walking long lines between hive stands, brushing bees off frames, kneeling, standing, kneeling again. Patience with stings. He gets stung every day, sometimes 30 or 40 times. Patience with the bees themselves, who don't, in the end, do what you tell them. He thinks between hives about the mountains. He climbs, when he can, in the southern winter, when the bees are quiet and Percy can spare him. He goes south by ferry and bus to the southern Alps, the long spine of high country down the western side of the South Island, and joins beginner parties run by the New Zealand Alpine Club. He learns ice axe technique. He learns crampons. He learns to belay a partner on a snow slope. He climbs a few small peaks. He makes some new friends. He goes home, to the bees, to the work. And then, in 1939, in September, the war begins in Europe. Britain declares war on Germany on the 3rd of September. New Zealand follows the same day. The country has, by population, the smallest professional standing army of any Commonwealth nation, but it begins immediately to recruit a volunteer expeditionary force to go to Egypt, and from there to wherever the war takes them. Edmund Hillary does not, at first, enlist. Beekeeping, in 1940 New Zealand, is a reserved occupation. Honey is a strategic food. The bees, and the people who keep them, are needed at home. The Hillary brothers are exempt from conscription. There's another reason. The family is, by then, attending services with the Plymouth Brethren, a small evangelical Christian movement, sometimes pacifist, that disapproves of military service. Percy and Gertrude both believe it. The brothers have grown up around it. For 3 years, 1939 to 1942, Edmund stays out of the war. He works the bees. He climbs in the winter. He thinks about the war. If you've drifted, the bees are still in the paddock. The mountains are still where they are. The story is still going on without you, gently, and it'll be here when you come back. In 1943, he enlists. He writes about it later in the careful, slightly self-deprecating way that becomes his lifelong style. He says he thought, by the 3rd year of the war, that he ought to do his share. He says the Brethren conviction had been more his parents' than his own. He says, in the end, he just wanted to see something of the world. All 3 reasons are probably true. None of them fully accounts for the decision. He joins the Royal New Zealand Air Force as a navigator. After training, he is posted to No. 5 Squadron, flying Catalinas, Catalinas, long-range patrol flying boats, twin-engined, slow, with bulbous gun blisters either side of the fuselage, and a glass nose where the navigator sits. The squadron flies out of Fiji and the Solomon Islands, mostly on air-sea rescue patrols, looking for downed aircrew on the long, warm sea between New Guinea and Tahiti. 12-hour flights, sometimes 13, long stretches of empty horizon, sandwiches and tea from a thermos. The navigator's job is to keep the aircraft found. He is good at navigation. The mathematical training, abandoned at university, comes back to him in a useful form. He plots the long arcs across the Pacific by sun and stars. He reads a lot of paperback novels in the empty hours. In June 1945, 2 months before the end of the Pacific War, he is in Fiji. He helps unload a refueling launch at a small forward base. There is a spark on the deck. The fuel ignites. The launch catches fire. He is thrown clear into the harbour, but not before flames have caught his uniform and his face. He sustains burns to his veer, his hands, and one leg. He is flown home to New Zealand to recover. He is in hospital for several months. The face heals. There There are some scars he will carry for the rest of his life, faint along the jaw, but you have to know to look for them. The hands heal well, the leg heals well. By the time the war ends, in August 1945, he is convalescing at his parents' house in Tuakau. He is 26 years old. He goes back to the bees in the spring of 1946. But something has shifted. 3 years away from the paddock has loosened his sense of the obligation. The war, for all its horror elsewhere, hasn't, in his case, used him hard. He hasn't shot at anyone or been shot at except through the deck fire accident. He's 26. He has saved his service pay. He has, for the first time in his life, some money of his own. He starts climbing seriously. In the southern summer of 1946 and 1947, December, January, February, he goes south to the Southern Alps for proper seasons of climbing. He stays at the Hermitage Hotel at the foot of Aoraki, O.W. Raki, which is the Maori name for the mountain the English call Mount Cook. Aoraki is 12,218 feet at the top, the highest mountain in New Zealand. It carries a long glacier on each side and a steep ice ridge along its summit. He meets, at the Hermitage, the two men who will teach him to climb properly. The first is Harry Ayres, a quiet professional guide from Christchurch, considered then the best ice climber in the country. The second is George Lowe, a school teacher from Hastings, a few years younger than Hillary, lanky, dry, witty, a natural partner. Over the next 2 seasons, Hillary climbs almost everything in the Southern Alps that is climbable. He makes first ascents. He makes second ascents. He makes the first ascent of the South Ridge of Aoraki with Harry Ayres in January 1948. It is, at that time, considered the hardest ice route in New Zealand. The climb takes 3 days. They bivouac twice, on small ledges, in sleeping bags, with a small stove and a tin of stew. On the summit, Aoraki tilts away to the east in a long, pale ridge. From the top, on a clear day, you can see most of the country. He goes home to Tuakau for the spring honey run. He is, by then, 28. He grows taller in the mountain world. In 1950, he gets, for the first time, an invitation to go to the Himalayas, the high range that runs along the northern border of India and Nepal, the highest mountains in the world. A small New Zealand expedition is forming, 4 climbers, to try a peak called Mukut Parbat in the Garhwal. Mukut Parbat in the Garhwal, the northern Indian state where the Ganges rises. Hillary signs on. Lowe doesn't go on this one. He can't get the time off school. The trip leaves in May 1951. They climb Mukut Parbat successfully, 23,760 feet at the summit, the first time anyone has been to the top of it. Hillary spends 6 weeks at altitude. He learns that he acclimatizes well, better than most. He learns that he can carry a load above 20,000 feet without much trouble. He learns that the Himalaya is bigger than anything he has imagined. And then, on the walk out from Mukut Parbat in July 1951, in a tea house in a small town in the Garhwal, the expedition runs into an Englishman who changes the course of Hillary's life. His name is Eric Shipton. Shipton is, at this point, the most experienced Himalayan mountaineer alive. He's been to Everest 4 times in the 1930s, 3 times with major British expeditions to the Tibetan side, once on a reconnaissance. He has just been appointed by the Joint Himalayan Committee, a body run jointly by the Royal Geographical Society and the Alpine Club, to lead a reconnaissance of the southern Nepalese side of Everest, which has, until that year, been entirely closed to foreigners. Nepal has opened its borders to climbing parties for the first time in 1950. The southern approach to Everest through the Khumbu Valley is suddenly possible. Shipton is going to walk in and look at the mountain from below. The Khumbu, Khumbu, is a high valley in eastern Nepal, just south of the Tibetan border, where the river Dudh Kosi runs down from the Everest massif. The Sherpa people live there. They are a Tibetan Buddhist farming and trading community, several thousand of them, scattered across the Solukhumbu, Khumbu, the broader district. They have been working as porters for British expeditions to the Tibetan side of Everest since the 1920s. They know the mountain from the north. They have never been allowed to climb on the south. Shipton needs climbers for his reconnaissance party. He asks Hillary if he wants to come. Hillary says yes. He telegraphs Rex at Tuakau. He asks his brother to take the bees alone for another 2 months. Rex telegraphs back, "Go." And in September 1951, Edmund Hillary walks for the first time into the valley of the Khumbu with a small British party led by Eric Shipton towards a mountain he has read about in adventure books since he was 12 years old. The walk-in takes 17 days, from the railhead at Jogbani on the Indian border, north through the foothills, past terraced rice paddies, over rope bridges across deep gorges, up through rhododendron forest, into the cooler pine zone, into the alpine zone, into the broad upper valleys of the Solukhumbu. They walk in light loads. The Sherpas carry the rest. 2 of the Sherpas are a man called Pasang and a man called Ang Tharke, Pa Sahang and Ang Tehioki, both experienced porters from the Khumbu. They reach the village of Namche Bazaar. Namche Bazaar, the main trading town of the Khumbu, at 11,000 feet in mid-October. Stone houses, slate roofs, prayer flags on the ridges above. The villagers come out to watch them arrive. Some of the men have already worked for Shipton on earlier expeditions. There are reunions on the steep main street. And from Namche they go on, north and east, for another 5 days. Up the Khumbu Valley, past the monastery at Tengboche, past the village of Ferish, up onto the moraine of the Khumbu Glacier. And at last, on the 28th of October 1951, they stand at about 18,000 feet on the lower glacier. And they look up. The mountain is in front of them. Everest, from the south. From this side, the side hardly any Westerner has seen before, is a complicated thing. It does not stand alone. 2 other very high mountains, Lhotse, Loatse, and Nuptse, Nupitse, form the rim of an upper basin called the Western Khum, the Welsh word for valley, pronounced co-m, which is what Mallory called it in 1921. The summit of Everest itself rises behind and above the basin, its southeast ridge running down to the col between Everest and Lhotse, the South Col at 26,000 feet, which is where any future expedition will have to camp. Between the lower glacier where Hillary stands and the entrance to the Western Khum is a steep, frozen waterfall about 2,000 feet high, full of ice towers the size of houses, breaking and moving and falling, threaded with crevasses. It is called the Khumbu Icefall. Whether anyone can climb through it, alive, is the question Shipton's party is here to answer. Over the next 3 weeks they work, in small parties, into the icefall, roped slowly with ice axes, cutting steps, putting up bamboo wands as markers, retreating in the afternoons when the sun loosens the ice and the towers start to shift. They get partway through. They establish that a route exists, more or less. They run out of time and food. They walk out of the Khumbu in mid-November, back down through Tengboche, back down through Namche, back down to the lowlands. The reconnaissance is officially a success. Everest from the south is possible. Hillary is, by this point, 32 years old. He is back in Tuakau for Christmas. He is back at the bees in January. But everyone in the mountaineering world now knows that the south side of Everest is possible, and everyone now knows there will be expeditions. The Swiss go first. In the spring of 1952, a Swiss expedition led by Edouard Gis Dunant, Aidu Dunant, walks into the Khumbu with the permission of the Nepalese government, which has granted them the year's permit. They are not amateurs. They are guides from the Alps, well-financed, well-equipped. They have the new lightweight oxygen sets the British did not have. And they have, as the Sirdar of their porter team, a Sherpa called Tenzing Norgay, who is already, by reputation, the most experienced Everest climber in the world. Tenzing Norgay is, in 1952, about 37 years old. He is from a Sherpa family from the Solo Khumbu, born, by his own later reckoning, in a yak herder's tent at a high pasture called Sarchu in May 1914. The exact date is unclear. The Sherpas did not keep birth records the way the West does. He moved as a teenager to Darjeeling, the Indian hill station on the Bengal-Sikkim border, where the British Himalayan expeditions hired their porters. He has been on Everest 5 times before 1952, with the British in 1935, 36, 38, and on a Canadian-Swiss recce in 1947. He has carried loads above 25,000 feet. He has not, yet, been to the top. He is small, wiry, dark-skinned, with very white teeth and a quick smile. He speaks Sherpa at home, Nepali in the bazaars, basic English with the climbers, some Hindi from his years in Darjeeling. He has a wife, Daku, and several children. He is steady, ambitious, careful with the white climbers, careful with money. On the Swiss expedition in May 1952, Tenzing partners with a French-Swiss guide called Raymond Lambert. The two of them push higher than anyone has pushed before. They reach a point at 28,215 feet on the southeast ridge of Everest, about 800 feet below the summit, and turn back, defeated by wind and dwindling oxygen and the cold. It is the highest any human has ever been. They walk down. The Swiss try again in the autumn of 1952 and fail again, higher up the same ridge. Their year is over. And the permit for 1953 has already been granted by the Nepalese government, months in advance, hedging their bets to the British, which is where Edmund Hillary, in the spring of 1952, in a paddock in Tuakau, gets the letter. The Joint Himalayan Committee in London writes to him and to George Lowe and a few other New Zealanders in May 1952 to invite them to join the British 1953 Everest expedition. The leader is to be Eric Shipton, the man Hillary met in the tea house. Hillary writes back the same week. He says yes. Lowe says yes. Rex agrees to take the bees alone for one more season. And then in September 1952, Eric Shipton is fired. The Joint Himalayan Committee decides, after long meetings in London, that the 1953 expedition is too important to be led by a man who has never reached a summit above 26,000 feet. Shipton is a brilliant reconnoiterer, a brilliant walker, a brilliant explorer. He is not, in their view, a summit getter. They want a military man, a planner. They appoint, instead, a 42-year-old colonel from the Royal Engineers called John Hunt. Hunt has climbed in the Alps. He has been to the Karakoram. He has, importantly, served under General Auchinleck in the Indian Army during the war. He understands logistics. He understands men. He understands the moving of a large operation to a difficult place. He is steady, well-read, religious in a quiet Anglican way, and almost universally liked. Hillary, in Tuakau, hears about the change of leader by letter in October. He's privately disappointed. He likes Shipton, but he doesn't withdraw. Neither does Lowe. The expedition is the expedition, regardless of who runs it. If you've drifted, that's fine. The planning is going on in offices in London, and you don't need to follow it. The mountain is still where it is. Come back when you can. Over the next 6 months, from October 1952 through to March 1953, Hunt assembles the expedition. The team eventually numbers 11 British and Commonwealth climbers, supported by 20 Sherpas and 350 porters. The climbers include Hunt himself, 2 doctors, Charles Evans and Michael Ward, 2 New Zealanders, Hillary and Lowe, and a small group of seasoned British alpinists, including Tom Bourdillon, Bour Dillon, a physicist by training, and Wilfred Noyce, a schoolmaster. Tenzing Norgay is invited to be the Sirdar of the Sherpas. He is also, this time, formally listed as a full climbing member of the expedition, the first time a Sherpa has been given that status by a British expedition. The equipment is prepared in London, Cardiff, Bombay. New oxygen sets, closed circuit and open circuit, two different designs in case one fails. New high-altitude boots, light leather and rubber, made by a small firm in Switzerland. New down-filled clothing. New tents. A curved mead pattern for the lower camps. A small box-shaped pyramid for the high camps. Compressed food, glucose tablets, hard-boiled sweets, Kendal mint cake. 4 tons of equipment in total. It travels by sea from London to Bombay, by train from Bombay across India to the Nepalese border, by porter from the border to Kathmandu, and finally by porter, 350 of them in long files, out of Kathmandu, up the long zigzag walk-in across the foothills, to the Solukhumbu, to Namche, to the Khumbu, to the foot of the mountain. The walk-in alone takes 17 days, same as 1951. Same rhododendron forest. Same monastery at Tengboche. Same wide pale view up the valley to the mountain. They arrive at base camp at 17,900 feet on the lower Khumbu glacier in late March 1953. They have, by the rules of the climbing season, about 10 weeks. The monsoon will arrive in early June and shut the mountain down. They need to get up and back before the weather closes. They start with the Icefall. The Khumbu Icefall, in the spring of 1953, is the same frozen waterfall Hillary and Shipton looked at 2 years before. But it has, of course, moved. The ice is alive. The towers have shifted. The route they marked then is gone. They start again. They put a route through, with rope, ladders made of pine logs lashed together, snow stakes, bamboo wands. It takes 2 weeks. They lose nobody. Through April, the expedition stocks the upper camps. Camp 2, at the head of the Icefall, 20,000 feet. Camp 3, at the base of the Lhotse face, 22,500 feet. Camp 4, partway up the Lhotse face. Camp 5 higher. Camp 6 near the South Col at 25,500 feet. Camp 7 on the col itself, 26,000 feet. Camp 8 will be put in later, just below the summit ridge. Loads are carried up by Sherpas and climbers, day after day. The work is exhausting and slow. The bottled oxygen is a help, but it doesn't change the long hours of carrying. The climbers acclimatize. They get headaches at the high camps. They sleep badly. They eat less. Hillary, the beekeeper, finds, as he found in 1951, that he acclimatizes better than most. He carries good loads to Camp 6. On the 26th of May, Hunt sends the first summit party. The first pair is Charles Evans and Tom Bourdillon, using the closed-circuit oxygen sets, the new, untested design that recycles exhaled breath through a soda-lime canister. The theory is that it gives much higher effective altitude. The practice is that it is heavy, and the canisters freeze, and the valves stick. Evans and Bourdillon leave Camp 7 on the South Col at dawn on the 26th of May. They climb the southeast ridge. They reach the south summit, a subsidiary peak about 300 feet below the true summit, at 28,700 feet. They have been climbing for 7 hours. Bourdillon's oxygen set is failing. They look across at the final ridge, a narrow snow ridge, about 100 yards long, with a 40-foot rock step partway along, then a final cornice. They estimate it will take them 3 more hours, at this rate. They estimate they don't have enough oxygen for both directions. They turn back. They reach the South Col exhausted. Bourdillon, in particular, is at the end of his strength. They have come closer than anyone has ever come. They have not reached the summit. At Camp 7 that night, John Hunt holds a small conversation with Hillary and Tenzing. Hunt asks them whether they think they can do it. He tells them they will use the open-circuit oxygen sets, the simpler design, which Hillary and Tenzing have used on the lower mountain. He tells them the weather forecast for the next 4 days. He asks if they are ready. Hillary says yes. Tenzing says yes. They go down to Camp 6 the next day to rest. Hunt and a small party climb up to the South Col, with Bourdillon and Evans coming down, and bring up extra oxygen bottles. The weather holds. The wind drops. The forecast for the 29th of May, sent up from the Met Office in India by radio relay, is clear. On the morning of the 28th of May 1953, Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay climb back up to the South Col. The wind has dropped to almost nothing. The sky is a hard, pale blue. They spend a few hours on the col, resting, drinking, eating what they can. The South Col is a wide saddle of bare rock and patches of ice, about 100 yards across, between Lhotse and Everest. There are several damaged tents from the Swiss expedition the year before still on the col. Old yellow canvas, frozen, half buried in scree. In the early afternoon, they leave the col with 2 Sherpas, Angnima, and another, carrying extra oxygen bottles for them. They climb slowly up the lower southeast ridge, cutting steps, breathing through the oxygen masks. They reach a small ledge at about 27,900 feet, a tilted platform of snow and rock, exposed to the wind on 3 sides. The Sherpas dump the load and turn back to the col. Hillary and Tenzing pitch a small pyramid tent on the ledge, holding it down with rocks and ice axes against the wind, and crawl inside. They are 2 men alone, on a tiny platform, at the foot of the southeast ridge of Everest, with the world dropping away on either side, and the summit 1,000 feet above. They cook a stew. They drink lemonade from a thermos. They make plans for the morning. Hillary writes about that night later. He says he doesn't sleep well. He says his feet feel cold even inside the down boots. He says he thinks, lying in the dark with the wind moving the tent. About his father reading the Tuakau district news on the veranda at home. About the bees in the paddock. About how strange it is to be where he is. Tenzing also doesn't sleep well. The 2 men lie head to foot in the small tent. They have known each other for 2 months. They communicate in basic English, supplemented by gestures and small smiles. They like each other. At 4 in the morning, the alarm clock goes off. They light the small stove. They melt snow for water. They drink hot lemonade. They eat sardines on biscuits. They put on the down boots. They check the oxygen cylinders. Hillary finds, when he unzips the tent, that his boots, which he has been holding inside his sleeping bag to keep warm, are nevertheless frozen solid. He spends an hour and a half on the small stove thawing them out before he can put them on. At 6:30 in the morning, they crawl out of the tent. The sun has just come up over the long horizon. The wind is light. The sky is clear. They start up the southeast ridge. Hillary leads. He cuts steps in the snow with his ice axe. He swings the axe twice for each step, packs the cut down with the side of his boot, moves up. Tenzing follows on the rope, 20 feet behind, paying out and bringing in slack, ready to catch him if he falls. They climb like this, slowly, alternating the lead every 50 or 60 steps to share the work. They reach the south summit, the place Bourdillon and Evans turn back, at 9 o'clock in the morning in the Waikato. From the south summit, the final ridge of Everest runs ahead of them, about 100 yards of narrow snow ridge, with a cornice on the right that hangs out into thin air over the Khumjung face on the Tibetan side. About halfway along, there is a 40-foot vertical step of rock and ice. What looks, from below, like the only real obstacle left. They sit on the south summit for a few minutes. They check the oxygen. They each have about half a cylinder left. Hillary calculates that they have enough for about 3 more hours of climbing. They go on. Hillary leads along the ridge. He keeps to the left of the cornice, kicking steps in the snow on the Nepalese side, well clear of the overhang. Tenzing follows. The wind is light. The light is hard and white. The mountain, dropping away on either side, is steeper than anything either of them has ever climbed. They reach the rock step. It rises about 40 feet above them, a smooth vertical wall of grey rock, splashed with ice. On the right side, against the cornice, a narrow crack runs up the rock, about a foot wide, packed with old snow and ice. Hillary studies the crack for a few minutes. He decides it is climbable, just. He takes off his pack so he can move more freely. He puts his back against the rock wall and 1 foot in the crack. He kicks the snow out of the crack with his boot, jams himself in, and works his way up. Back against the rock, feet kicking small steps in the ice, hands above his head, finding small holds in the snow. He emerges at the top of the step, gasping into the oxygen mask. He sits on a small ledge and brings up the rope. Tenzing comes up the same way. They are above the step. They are about 30 feet from the summit. They climb the last gentle slope of snow, side by side, 1 rope length apart. They reach the top. It is 11:30 in the morning, on the 29th of May 1953. The summit of Everest is a small ridge of snow about the size of a kitchen table. 2 men can stand on it. There is no wind. The sky is a hard navy blue at the zenith, paler towards the horizons. Mountains stretch in every direction, brown and white and lower than they are, all the way to the curve of the earth. Hillary turns to Tenzing. Tenzing turns to Hillary. They shake hands briefly. Then Tenzing throws an arm around Hillary's shoulders and pats him on the back. And Hillary pats Tenzing on the back. And the 2 men, with the oxygen mask still over their faces, stand at the top of the world for a moment, in a small embrace. Tenzing takes off his pack and brings out 4 small flags on a string. The flag of the United Nations, the flag of the United Kingdom, the flag of Nepal, the flag of India. He attaches the string to the long shaft of his ice axe. He holds the ice axe up against the sky. Hillary takes a photograph. It is one of the most reproduced photographs of the 20th century. A small dark figure in down clothing and an oxygen mask on a ridge of snow, holding an ice axe with a string of flags against an impossibly dark sky. Tenzing then asks Hillary, with gestures, if he wants Tenzing to take one of him. Hillary shakes his head and waves the gesture off. He says later that he doesn't think to ask. He says he is half conscious from the altitude. He says, in his autobiography, that he regrets it for the rest of his life. He buries a small crucifix that John Hunt has given him to leave at the top. A personal thing of Hunt's. Tenzing buries a few small offerings. A bar of chocolate, a packet of biscuits, a pencil his daughter gave him, in the snow, as a Buddhist gift to the mountain that the Sherpas call Chomolungma, Cho Mo Lungma, Mother Goddess of the world. They stand on the summit for 15 minutes. Then Hillary checks the oxygen. They have, between them, about an hour and a half left. They start down. They are off the summit by 11:45. The descent is, in some ways, the harder half. They reverse the route, down the gentle slope, down the rock step. Hillary belays Tenzing down first this time, then climbs down himself, back along the corniced ridge, back across the south summit, down the long southeast ridge to Camp 9. They reach the tent at about 2 in the afternoon. They drink lemonade. They sit, exhausted, for half an hour. Then they pack up. They go on down to the South Col, where George Lowe meets them with hot soup. Hillary's first words to Lowe, recorded by everyone who heard them, repeated for the rest of his life, are, "Well, George, we knocked the bastard off." They sleep that night at the South Col. Then they go down, the next day, to Camp 4, and the day after that, to Camp 2, and the day after that, to base camp at the foot of the Icefall, where most of the rest of the expedition is waiting. John Hunt walks out from his tent at base camp to meet them. He shakes Hillary's hand. He shakes Tenzing's hand. He says nothing for a moment. Then he says quietly, "Well done, both of you." If you've drifted by now, That's fine. They got up. They got down. Everyone is safe at base camp. You can come back when the world finds out, in a few days. The news in 1953 doesn't travel quickly. The expedition has a single radio set capable of reaching the British Embassy in Kathmandu by Morse. It also has, embedded with it, a Times correspondent, a journalist called James Morris, in his 20s, who has walked in with the expedition and is sleeping in a tent at base camp. The Times has paid a great deal of money for exclusive coverage. The coronation of the new Queen, Elizabeth II, is scheduled for the 2nd of June. The Times, more in hope than expectation, would dearly like a summit story for the morning of the coronation. James Morris hears the summit news at base camp on the 30th of May. He sits in his tent. Hillary and Tenzing have just walked in. He goes outside to find Hunt and confirm. Hunt says yes. Morris immediately starts walking down, back through the Khumbu, back through Namche, back down the long zigzag towards Kathmandu, with a coded message in his pocket for the British Embassy. The code is simple. The phrase, "Snow conditions bad," means the climb has failed. The phrase, "Snow conditions excellent," followed by the names of the summit pair, means it has succeeded. He walks for 3 days, very fast, alongside a Sherpa runner. They reach a relay radio post at Namche on the 2nd of June. Very early in the morning, Morris files his coded telegram. The telegram reaches Kathmandu. From Kathmandu, it goes to London by cable. From London, it goes to the Times. The morning of the coronation, the 2nd of June 1953, breaks cold and grey over London. People line the route from Buckingham Palace to Westminster Abbey, 10 deep. The newsboys come out at 5 in the morning with the early edition. The Times leads with the headline, "Everest conquered. Hillary and Tenzing reach the summit." The crowd waiting in the rain reads it as the coach goes by. The new Queen reads it, possibly, between the procession and the coronation service. The news, by mid-morning, is across the United Kingdom and on its way around the world. Edmund Hillary is, by the time the morning papers reach the breakfast tables of London, a name in the world. He doesn't know it yet. He's still walking out from base camp with the rest of the expedition. He gets the news, properly, in Kathmandu on the 7th of June, a sheaf of cables waiting at the British Embassy. He is invited to Government House. He is offered a knighthood. He accepts. He is, by July, Sir Edmund Percival Hillary, KBE. Tenzing Norgay, as an Indian citizen and not a British subject, cannot, by the rules of the British honours system, be knighted. He is instead given the George Medal, a civilian decoration for bravery. India and Nepal, separately, give him their own highest decorations. He is, in Asia, a national hero. He is, in the world, the other man on the summit. There is, in the years after 1953, a quiet, long-running question about who, exactly, was first onto the summit. Reporters ask it in 1953. Reporters ask it in 1960. Reporters ask it on every anniversary of the climb for the rest of both men's lives. Hillary, almost always, answers the same way. We climbed it together. We reached the top almost at the same moment. There is no first. Tenzing answers similarly for years, until, in his autobiography in 1955, written with the American James Ramsey Ullman, he confirms that Hillary stepped onto the summit first by about a rope length. He says he does not mind. He says the climb was the two of them, and the question is the world's, not theirs. Both men hold to that for the rest of their lives. Hillary goes back to Tuakau in the autumn of 1953. He arrives at Auckland by flying boat. He is met by his family, by the press, by the Mayor of Auckland, by the Prime Minister of New Zealand. He is, by the time he gets through the dock gates and into a waiting car, the most famous New Zealander in the world. He goes back to the bees in October. Rex has kept them going. The hives are ready for the spring honey run. Hillary, in a felt hat now slightly more famous than he is, puts on the white netting and lifts the lids and checks the frames, the way he has done since 1939. He says later that the bees were the same as they had ever been. The world had changed. The bees had not. He marries, in September of that year, a young woman called Louise Mary Rose. Louise is 22, 12 years younger than Hillary. She is the daughter of an Auckland accountant called Jim Rose, who has known Hillary for some years through the Alpine Club. She is small, dark-haired, sharply intelligent. She plays the viola. She speaks French and German. She has been in love with Hillary since she was 19, and she met him at a Rose family party. Hillary, by his own admission, has not noticed. His mother, Gertrude, in the summer of 1953, before the homecoming, has a quiet word with him. She tells him that Louise Rose is, she has noticed, in love with him. She tells him that he might want to think about it. She says, if he wants, she'll write to Louise on his behalf. Hillary, somewhere between Kathmandu and Auckland, agrees. Gertrude writes to Louise. Louise writes back. Hillary, on arrival in Auckland in September, asks Louise to marry him in the lobby of the British Embassy. Louise says yes. They are married 3 days later, at the Rose family home in Auckland. He honeymoons with her on a 6-week public tour of the United States, where he gives lectures on Everest to packed houses in 18 cities. She comes with him to all of them. They get to know each other on aeroplanes. Their first child, Peter, is born in 1954. Sarah follows in 1955. Belinda is born in 1959. Edmund Hillary, in the second half of the 1950s, is one of the most famous men in the English-speaking world. He gives lectures. He writes a book. He raises money. He turns down most of the offers of corporate sponsorship and product endorsement that come his way. He keeps living in Auckland. He still spends a fortnight every summer with the bees, helping Rex run the spring honey run. And in 1956, he is invited to join the Commonwealth Trans-Antarctic Expedition. The Trans-Antarctic Expedition is the brainchild of an English geologist called Vivian Fuchs, pronounced Fuchs, who wants to do something no one has ever done. He wants to cross the entire continent of Antarctica from the Weddell Sea on the Atlantic side over the South Pole to the Ross Sea on the Pacific side on tractors. 2,158 miles across a continent that has been crossed by only one previous overland expedition, Roald Amundsen's, in 1911 and 1912. Fuchs will lead the main party from the Weddell Seaside. Hillary will lead a smaller New Zealand party from the Ross Seaside. Hillary's job is to lay supply depots of food and fuel between the Ross Sea base and the pole, so that Fuchs's tractors, when they cross the continent and reach the pole, will have enough fuel to make it the rest of the way to the Ross Sea. Hillary spends most of 1957 at a Ross Sea base called Scott Base, named for Robert Falcon Scott, who died on the way back from the South Pole in 1912. He flies in surveys. He helps set up the base. He goes out in the spring of 1957 and 1958 with a team of 4 New Zealanders on 3 converted Ferguson tractors fitted with caterpillar tracks to lay the depots. The Fergusons are not really designed for Antarctica. They have no heated cabs. They run on petrol that freezes at extreme cold. They break down often. The team carries spare parts in the trailers and stops in 50 below temperatures to weld broken brackets. The work is, in its own way, beekeeping work, patient, mechanical, repetitive. Hillary is good at it. He lays the depots, one after another, working his way south. Depot 1, Depot 2, Depot 3. By December 1957, he is halfway to the pole. He has fuel left over. And then Hillary, against orders, decides to go on. His role, formally, is depot laying. He has been told, in writing, not to go beyond the final depot. But he has fuel. The weather is good. Fuchs, on the other side of the continent, is behind schedule. Hillary calculates that his small team, on the 3 Fergusons, can probably reach the South Pole itself in another 3 weeks. He decides to try. He radios the news to base camp. He radios it to Fuchs. Fuchs, busy with his own struggle on the other side, sends a cautious reply suggesting Hillary turn back. Hillary keeps going. He and his team reach the South Pole at 3 minutes to 2 in the morning on the 4th of January 1958 in continuous daylight, on 3 farm tractors with a wave from the small American base that has been operating at the pole, the first Amundsen Scott station, for 14 months. The Americans give them tea and biscuits. The Americans take their photograph. Edmund Hillary is the first man to reach the South Pole overland since Robert Falcon Scott in 1912. 46 years. The reaction in London and Wellington is mixed. Hillary is a hero. He has also disobeyed orders. The Daily Telegraph runs a critical editorial. The expedition's joint committees consider, briefly, withdrawing his commendation. Fuchs, when he reaches the pole 3 weeks later, in his own tractors, is asked at the press conference what he thinks of Hillary going ahead. He says, carefully, that he is glad they all made it. Hillary, by his own later account, finds the criticism harder than the cold. He writes that he hadn't expected it. He writes that by his own lights, He had done what made sense at the time. He writes that the controversy stays with him for the rest of his life, and that he never quite stops feeling stung by it. He goes home in March 1958 to Tuakau. The bees come back. Louise is pregnant with Belinda. Rex has run the operation alone. Again. The honey run starts in February. Hillary, the famous man, helps with the lifting. If you've drifted off, that's fine. Antarctica is over. He's home. The next chapter is gentler. In the summer of 1960, Hillary is back in the Khumbu. He has gone back with George Lowe and a few others on a small ad hoc expedition to look for evidence of the Yeti, the legendary creature of Tibetan and Sherpa folklore. The expedition is funded by an American magazine which wants a series of articles. Hillary, by then, has come round to the view that funding adventures by writing about them is a reasonable way to make a living. They don't find a Yeti. The famous Yeti scalp at the Khumjung, Khumjung monastery turns out, under examination, to be made from the hide of a sero, a Himalayan goat antelope. They do find in the course of the expedition what matters more. They find that the Sherpa villages of the Khumbu and the Khumbu have, almost without exception, no schools. There are about 3,000 Sherpas in the valleys in 1960. Almost none of them can read. Of those who can, almost all have learned at one of the Buddhist monasteries, which teach Tibetan script and religious texts, but not the broader literacy that would, in the modern world, let a Sherpa farmer or trader read a contract or write to a relative in Kathmandu. The Sherpas have lived as a traditional society for centuries. They are starting to see, by the late 1950s, that the world is changing around them. Hillary, one evening, in the village of Khumjung, has a conversation with the village headman. He asks the headman, through a translator, what the village most wants. He expects the answer to be money, or food aid, or a clinic. The headman thinks for a while. Then he says, "Our children need to be educated. We want a school." Hillary, the next morning, writes a letter to a friend in Chicago, a Sears Roebuck heir called Field Enterprises, who has previously offered to support him in any project he wants to take on. Hillary asks for $10,000 to build a school at Khumjung. The money arrives within a month. The school opens, with 3 classrooms and a wood stove, in the spring of 1961. Hillary, by the time it opens, has carried the corrugated iron for the roof up the valley on his back. He doesn't quite know it yet, but he has just started the work that will fill the rest of his life. The Himalayan Trust, founded in 1961 with Hillary as chairman, becomes the umbrella organization for the work. Over the next 47 years it will build, in the Khumbu, 27 schools, 2 main hospitals, 12 medical clinics, 3 airstrips, a forestry program, a water supply program, a series of bridges, and a small group of teachers' training colleges. Hillary raises most of the money himself by writing books and giving lectures and asking, plainly, for what he needs. He goes back to the Khumbu on foot every year for the rest of his life. He inspects the building work. He walks the long valleys. He sits in the schools and hospitals and watches the children and the patients. He becomes, in the solo Khumbu, a quiet and beloved figure, known to the Sherpas as Bura Sahib, Bura Sahib, Big Sir, which is what they call him with affection rather than distance. The hospital at Kunde opens in 1966. The hospital at Phap Lu opens in 1975. It is on the 31st of March 1975 at the airstrip at Kathmandu that the worst thing in Edmund Hillary's life happens. Louise Hillary and their youngest daughter, Belinda, fly from Kathmandu out to Phap Lu to join Hillary, who is already there for the opening of the new hospital. They board a small single-engined aircraft, a Pilatus Porter, Pilatus, Swiss-built, designed for high-altitude work, at Kathmandu Airport at about 3 in the afternoon. There are 7 people on board. The pilot, Louise, Belinda, and 4 others. The aircraft takes off normally. 8 seconds after takeoff, at about 100 feet above the runway, the engine fails. The pilot tries to turn back. The aircraft loses lift, banks, and hits the ground hard. All 7 people on board are killed. Louise is 43 years old. Belinda is 16. Hillary, at Phap Lu, an hour's flight north, gets the news by radio from Kathmandu at 5 in the afternoon. He sits down on a stone wall outside the hospital that he is in the country to open. He cannot, for several minutes, get up. He doesn't cry until the next morning, when his older daughter, Sarah, who is 20, gets to him. He does not, by his own account, fully recover. Many people who suffer something like that loss do not fully recover. He spends the rest of the year mostly in Auckland. He drinks more than he should. He keeps going. The trust keeps going too. Sarah, the surviving daughter, takes on more of the work over the next decade. The schools and the hospitals are still being built. The need has not changed. He goes back to Tuakau. The bees are still in the paddock. Rex is still running the operation. Hillary sits on the veranda of the old wooden house, which by then belongs to Rex, and drinks tea and watches the bees coming into the hive entrances with the late summer pollen. He works at the trust. He goes back to the solo Khumbu. He keeps walking the long valleys. In 1985, the New Zealand government appoints him High Commissioner to India, the senior diplomatic post in Delhi. He accepts. He goes. He lives in Delhi for 3 years, with Sarah and her family nearby, working in the High Commission, attending state functions, sitting through long dinners with Rajiv Gandhi. He uses the post as much as he can to support the trust. The Khumbu is a short flight from Delhi. He goes up most weekends he can find. He comes back to New Zealand in 1988. He marries, the following year, a woman called June Mulgrew. June is the widow of Hillary's old friend Peter Mulgrew, who was on the Antarctic team in 1957 and who was killed in 1979 in the Everest disaster. when an Air New Zealand sightseeing flight to Antarctica flew into Mount Erebus in cloud, killing all 257 on board. June has known Hillary since the 1950s. They marry quietly at the Auckland Registry Office in December 1989. June moves into the Hillary house in Remuera, in the eastern suburbs of Auckland, a modest single-story wooden house on a quiet street with a small garden, a study at the back, and a view, on clear days, of the Hauraki Gulf. Hauraki, the long, shallow gulf that runs out from Auckland into the Pacific. He lives there for the rest of his life. In 1992, the Reserve Bank of New Zealand redesigns the $5 note. They put Edmund Hillary's face on the front. He is the only New Zealander, and one of very few people in the world, to appear on the currency of his own country while still alive. The note shows him in middle age, 50-odd, before the grief had marked him, with Aoraki on the back. He keeps a small framed copy on the wall of his study. He turns 70 in 1989, 80 in 1999. He keeps walking the Solukhumbu valleys, more slowly, with younger trust workers. He still gives lectures, but fewer of them. He writes his second autobiography, View from the Summit, in 1999, a more reflective book than his first, more honest about the grief. Tenzing Norgay dies in 1986. He is 71. He dies of a brain hemorrhage at his home in Darjeeling, the Indian hill station where he settled after Everest, and where he ran the Himalayan Mountaineering Institute for 30 years, training a generation of Indian and Nepalese climbers. Hillary, in Auckland, hears the news by phone. He flies to Darjeeling for the funeral. He stands with Tenzing's family at the cremation pyre. On the flight back to Auckland, Hillary writes a piece for the New Zealand Herald about his old climbing partner. He writes that they had been to the top of the mountain together, 33 years before, and had been friends ever since. He writes that he will miss him. He keeps working. The trust keeps building. In 2003, on the 50th anniversary of the first ascent, the King of Nepal awards him honorary Nepalese citizenship, the first foreigner ever given it. He flies to Kathmandu for the ceremony. He is 83. He gives a short speech in the royal palace in English, with a Nepali translator. He says in the speech that the people of the Solukhumbu have given him more than he has ever been able to give them. He continues to walk in the Khumbu at 85, 86. The local Sherpas, by then, do most of the carrying. He uses a walking stick. He sits in the new classrooms. The new classrooms have, by then, electric light, and computers donated by trust supporters, and small windows that look out at the same wide, pale view up the valley to the mountain. He receives in 2003, also, the Order of the Garter, the oldest order of chivalry in the British honours system, from Queen Elizabeth. He travels to Windsor for the installation. He wears the blue velvet robes. He is, by then, formally Knight Companion of the Most Noble Order of the Garter. He stays, in his own description, a beekeeper from Tuakau. On the 11th of January, 2008, in Auckland City Hospital, Edmund Percival Hillary dies of heart failure. He is 88 years old. June is at the bedside. Peter and Sarah are at the bedside. The New Zealand government declares a state funeral. It is held at St Mary's Cathedral in Parnell, central Auckland, on the 22nd of January. 5,000 people attend. The Prime Minister speaks. The leader of the opposition speaks. The president of the Himalayan Trust speaks. Sherpas from the Khumbu fly in for it, in traditional dress, and stand at the back of the cathedral. Outside, in the rain, another 15,000 people watch on screens set up in the square. His ashes are scattered, mostly, in the Hauraki Gulf, the long, shallow water he watched from his study window. A small portion is taken back to the Khumbu by trust workers and buried at a small stupa near the monastery at Tengboche, on the long ridge above the valley. He has come a long way on the long arc of the Pacific, from the clover paddock in Tuakau to a high ridge above the Khumbu. And the long story comes back round. It comes back round to a paddock in Tuakau. The paddock is, by now, paddock again. The wooden house Percy and Gertrude built in 1920 was sold by Rex in the 1970s and demolished by a later owner in the 1990s. The beekeeping operation Rex ran for 60 years has been broken up and the hives sold to other beekeepers in the Waikato. Rex himself died in 2004. The land where the family hive stood is now part of a dairy farm. But the clover still comes up in spring, the way it always has. The bees on neighbouring blocks still work it, the way they always have. A mile away, the Waikato bends south through the dairy country, the way it always has. And the long, thin arc of the Pacific runs from Tuakau all the way north and west, across the equator, across the warm, dark seas where Hillary flew his Catalinas in the war, across the broad subcontinent of India, up into the high, cold passes of the Khumbu, and on to the south col of Everest, 26,000 feet above the sea. The arc holds. Edmund Hillary, by the time he dies in January 2008, is, to most of the world, still the answer to one question: who was the first man on Everest? More than 5,000 people have stood on the summit since 1953. More than 300 have died on the mountain. The Hillary Step, the 40-foot rock pitch he climbed first, with his back in the crack, partly collapses in the April 2015 Nepal earthquake, but it is still named for him, and climbers still mention his name as they pass the place. The schools he and the Trust built, 27 of them, scattered through the Khumbu, still teach. The 2 hospitals, at Koonde and Faplu, still treat. The 12 clinics still run. The Teachers Training College at Salary still trains teachers. The airstrip at Lukla, which Hillary helped scrape flat with his own team in 1964, is the gateway to Everest for almost everyone who flies into the Khumbu. A small, bumpy strip on a hillside in mist, used by every climber, every trekker, every aid worker, every visiting doctor. The Himalayan Trust still operates. It is, after his death, run by his daughter Sarah, who keeps the office in Auckland, the relationships with the Sherpa communities, the annual fundraising in the way her father did. Sarah's son and Peter's children also work for it. It is, in the way of slow, patient organizations, a family business now. Tenzing's son Jamling, in 2002, climbs Everest with Hillary's son Peter, 50 years after their fathers, and stands on the same summit on a clear morning in May and looks out at the same horizon, the same curve of the earth. The two of them embrace on the summit, the way their fathers did. They take, this time, a photograph of both of them. Hillary's face is on the New Zealand $5 note. Still, Aoraki is on the back, the bronze statue of him outside the Hermitage Hotel, where he climbed in 1948, looks up at the south face of the mountain. And the bees, on small blocks of land scattered through the Waikato and the King Country. 800 or so commercial beekeepers in the country now, plus tens of thousands of small hobby keepers, still come out of their hives every spring, and the keepers still lift the lids, and they still feel the weight of the frames in their hands. The work has not really changed. The smoke is still piped from a tin smoker. The netting hood is still made of fine white mesh. The honey, when it comes off in February, is still racked in wooden boxes and trucked to a warehouse and drummed and labelled and sold. The young man in the white netting hood in the paddock in February 1939 would, looking now, recognize almost all of it. Which brings us, finally, back to the paddock. It's a hot afternoon in February 1939. Two brothers are at the edge of a clover paddock, 20 feet apart, in white netting hoods. The smoker is putting up a thin grey column. The flatbed truck is parked at the gate. The taller brother is 19 years old. He lifts heavy boxes off the top of a beehive and stacks them on the truck. He has been doing it since 7 o'clock this morning. He will do it again tomorrow. Now the listener knows everything. They know the small wooden house at the other end of the town, and the long train commutes to Auckland Grammar, and the school trip to Mount Ruapehu, and the Catalinas, and the south ridge of Odi-Riki, and the tea house in the Garhwal, where Eric Shipton said yes, and the long walk in to the Kiomembu, and the small tent at 27,900 feet, and the kitchen table-sized summit, and the lemonade on the way down, and the school at Khumjung, and the corrugated iron carried up the valley on his back, and the runway at Kathmandu in 1975, and the veranda in Auckland 40 years on, and the wide flat water of the Hauraki Gulf. The young man in the paddock doesn't know any of it. He doesn't know that in 14 years and 3 months, he will be the first person to set foot on the highest place on Earth. Or that the photograph he takes on the summit of a small arc figure on a ridge of snow holding up an ice axe with 4 flags will become one of the most reproduced photographs of the 20th century. Or that, decades on, his ashes will be carried, partly in a small painted urn up a hillside in the Khumbu, and buried at a stupa above a monastery, with prayer flags moving in the wind off the mountain. He lifts the lid off the next hive, He brushes the bees back with the soft brush. He pulls out a frame. The frame is heavy. He hefts it in one hand to feel the weight. He nods to himself. He sets it on the truck. He moves to the next hive. The afternoon stays warm. The bees are calm. The clover keeps flowering. This has been History to Sleep To. Subscribe for future episodes. They're dropping twice a week. Produced by Stupid Human Limited.